Welcome to Drinking on the Edge. I'm its host, David Fuhrer. Joining me today in our Radio Free Rhinecliff studios here in the Mid-Hudson Valley in the middle of winter, and it truly is a winter day, is the sometimes present Carlo DeVito as my co-host. Welcome, Carlo.
Hello, welcome. Thank you.
And overseeing things is Matthew Mercier, our producer.
Hi, folks.
However, joining us by Zoom are no less than four craft distillers from the state of Tennessee. Now, we've all heard of Tennessee whiskeys, but Carlo, who's written a book on that very same subject. What's the name of it, Carlo?
It's called Tennessee Whiskey. Can't miss it.
These four gents joining us from Tennessee are going to be talking about, with Carlo, the history, culture, current contemporary state, distillation practices that make whiskeys in Tennessee unique to the state. And we've got a few examples here that we'll be tasting during our show.
Everybody say hello. Why don't you each in turn take a moment and introduce yourselves?
And your distillery, please.
I'll go first. Lee Kennedy here, proprietor and head distiller at Leaper Sport Distillery. A very small batch operation. We make about 25,000 gallons of whiskey per year, roughly 500 barrels. A lot of attention to detail, use locally sourced grains, pot distillation, so we can get into some of that later. But yeah, so just thanks for having me.
Oh, no, thank you.
Been operating since 2016.
Thank
April
you
of
for
2016.
participating. Matt.
Yes, sir. Matt Cunningham. I'm the founder of Old Glory Distilling Company in Clarksville, Tennessee. We primarily produce Tennessee whiskey and also Tennessee bourbon. Like Lee, we opened in 2016, started off on a 500-gallon pot still, and then in 2021 brought in a whole new system where we run a 14-inch continuous column now, and we run both a pot still and a continuous column. Our plant capacity is around 3,500 barrels a year, and always trying to grow that.
I have to say, Matt's is an amazing operation in that the first time I met Matt, I think you maybe had about 35, 40 barrels going. And the next time I visited him, they had 2 warehouses. So really glad to see your success, man. Very cool. And who's in the house from Greenbrier?
Brandon O'Daniel, new head distiller for Nelson's Greenbrier. Been in charge of the ship the last 3 months, originating out of Louisville, Kentucky with Copper and Kings, though. Currently running both distilleries.
Wow, that's a lot of work right there. Those are 2 really good distilleries. Really impressive.
Thank you. Busy man these days. Loving every minute.
Are you drawing double salary then?
That is the one thing they did not give me.
Oh, he's swimming in money. And then the last, but certainly not the least, possibly the most important, is Mike Williams. Mike, tell us a little bit about your distillery, and then we're going to go into some history.
Gee, you made me out to be something. Mike Williams, I'm with the Tennessee Distilling Group. We're in Columbia, Tennessee. We do Tennessee whiskey, Tennessee bourbon. We bottle, we store, we distill custom mash bills for brands of whiskey all across the United States and internationally. We don't do our own brand, but we do a lot of work for a lot of others.
Now, Mike is a very humble individual, and he's very quiet, although he's very funny once you get him cornered, and then it's a little more private. But what's fascinating about Tennessee whiskey is that Tennessee was one of the top 2 producers of whiskey in the United States before Prohibition. And the important thing to know about Tennessee is that Tennessee was hit with Prohibition 10 years before national Prohibition took place. And so you had an entire massive whiskey or distilling industry just completely wiped off the chart long before what happened to the rest of the country. And up until what year, Micah? 2013, you guys only had 3 distilleries. There was Daniels, Dickel, and Pritchard's. And how it started, you and what's his name joined forces.
There were...
What's his name? It's not awful.
In 2009, my dad and I had been actually talking about building a whiskey distillery for a long time, years, since I'd been 16 years old. And it had become a joke after a while. And on my 50th birthday, somebody said, "You're 50 years old. Are you doing what you want to be doing?" And I was a lobbyist for oil companies. I'd been a member of the Tennessee General Assembly and had left there voluntarily, by the way, and had started doing government relations for an association of oil companies. And I said, yeah, I like what I'm doing, but what I'd really like to do is be in the whiskey business. But I'm 50. I'm too old to do it. And my wife said, well, you're really not. But if you're going to do it, you need to get on it. So we started looking at what it would take to do that. And it wasn't illegal. It was just impossible, because you had to go through a referendum. You had to get the county commission to vote by 2/3 to put a referendum on the ballot to have distilleries in the county. So I started looking at what it would take. And when I started doing that, I didn't really realize there was a whole craft distilling movement in the country. And there were other people who were thinking about the same thing. And I ran into a guy named Heath Clark, who actually works with us now here. And he's an attorney, and he was looking at passing a law too. And I had a bill written which just opened up craft distilling in one county. Heath had written a very elegant piece of legislation that said that if you already had liquor stores and you already had liquor by the drink, then you should be able to have a manufacturing operation there too, because the people had spoken. And that seemed to be a better way to do it. My bill was ready to pass actually on the Senate floor one morning, but if it had passed, we weren't going to get two bites at the apple. The sponsor of my bill withdrew his, and we substituted the bill that Heath had written. And that was I lobbied for 20 years, so I was in the legislature for 10 years. And that was the single most contentious piece of legislation I had ever seen. We actually had one legislator say, I'm not going to vote for this because it's about whiskey. And we said, you voted for the winery bill. He said, Jesus drank wine. We're talking about whiskey. And it was on the floor of the House 5 days and finally passed. But when it passed in a different form, then it passed in the Senate. So we had to go to a conference committee. Now, in a conference committee, anything can happen because the committee could completely rewrite the bill, which they did. And they gave me a form of the bill that was completely different than what we started with, and said, get everybody whose county this applies to sign off on it. So I had to go door to offices in the legislature and get the legislators to actually sign off on the keeping their county in, and people were taking their counties out. They were wanting other counties put in, and we ended up legalizing distilleries in maybe 50 counties out of the 95 that are in the state, and that's the way it started. But it passed the Senate 17-16, one vote more than it took to become law, and it did become law. Then Governor Bredesen signed it into law. It was a pretty happy day.
I think the funniest thing that anybody's told me was he said about 3 years, I guess it was about 3 years later, a whole bunch of other counties suddenly wanted back in.
Everybody wanted back in. The county I'm sitting in right here, where my distillery is, actually wanted out of the bill. And we took this county out of the bill. And about 3 years later, they all wanted in. And
he said it was one of the best days of his life. He's just smirking the whole day.
Heath did it was one of the most elegantly crafted pieces of legislation that I had ever seen. It was just fabulous how he put it together and came up with the idea of the public has already made its opinion known by these other two referendums.
The other great quote from this, if I may add, was from Mike, which is, if you're interested in politics, it's watching them make the sausage. Eat the sausage, don't watch them make it.
No, if you love the law or you love sausage, don't watch either being made.
So just to circle back, if I could, in what year was the legislation passed allowing for craft distilling in Tennessee?
2009.
Okay.
And, it passed, I guess it was August 2009, somewhere along there.
And you went from 3 distilleries. Last I counted, they were around 50. Has that continued to grow, or is that about more or less where it's at?
I think it peaked out around there. Lee, don't you think?
Yeah, and Matt would probably we're having our Distillers Guild meeting tomorrow at Matt's place in Clarksville, and I think that sounds about right, 50.
I agree. I think it's right around there.
So it was miraculous. In 10 years, you saw that kind of growth. As far as distilling was going, it was just an incredible experience. So now, important to get to the next level of this, which is what makes Tennessee whiskey. For the audience, I have to say that in most cases, a lot of the Tennessee whiskeys mimic a bourbon mash bill, but then there is an extra step. Does anybody want to jump in on this one? Who's the most dedicated Tennessee whiskey guy? Go ahead, Lee.
And of course, Brandon, Matt, and Mike disagree with me. We have a kind of a smart ass answer here at the distillery where people ask us, we get the question every day, what's the difference between Tennessee whiskey and bourbon? And some distilleries want to make a clear delineation. And we say that the only reason Tennessee whiskey is not bourbon is because Tennesseans don't want it to be. And there is a little bit of truth to that. Technically, we follow all of the protocols of producing bourbon, being 51% corn that we all know, distilled at 160 proof or less, in a new oak container, bottled at 80 proof or more. So Tennessee whiskey checks all those boxes. There is one step, which obviously these guys can elaborate on. Before that whiskey goes into the cask, it has to be filtered through a layer of sugar maple charcoal. Interesting, the law doesn't stipulate how much charcoal or for what length of time. That's up to the various producers. So we go through about 4 feet of charcoal here at the distillery. We use more of the jack approach. There's multiple ways to accomplish it. These guys probably have their own intricate ways they do it. It takes us about 36 hours. But yeah, I would say technically Tennessee whiskey, I think the feds consider Tennessee whiskey to be bourbon. There's a box for gin, there's a box for vodka, there's a box for bourbon, but not really Tennessee whiskey. But I do think that charcoal mellowing step really shapes that Tennessee whiskey, and we can obviously elaborate on that as well.
Yeah, for the general consumer who might not be as clued in as we all here are, can you briefly share what charcoal means to Tennessee whiskey and what that does to the final product?
Somebody else jump in.
Nobody knows.
So it's the mystery ingredient, eh?
Dude, go ahead, guys.
Somebody, Matt, come on, jump on in.
The charcoal itself, you got your Brita filter that you filter your water through, uses charcoal. So charcoal's forever been a filtering media. The fact that the law stipulates maple charcoal makes a difference. And there's definitely a flavor difference between pre-filtered and filtered distillate. And for us, we think that difference is huge. And it's really fun to taste them side by side and pick out the differences.
I think it's interesting to note, by the way, that the history of this is that it was Nathan Nearest Green who first came up, who did it in such a way that it became a commercial process. And he was the son of slaves. And it was said that charcoal filtering was certainly something that slaves had brought with them from Africa. And it was used with all kinds of liquids. And for him, it was the concept of a natural process, but became so inured to the actual spirit that it became part of what became Tennessee whiskey. But he was the person who started it.
If you go up to the old Greenbrier distillery that's in ruins up in Greenbrier, Tennessee, the leaching vats are still out in the ground outside where they would leach through the sugar maple charcoal there. I think the reason it's sugar maple is because it's something we have a lot of here. It burns with a lot of ash, and it's easy to burn it down into a really hard, really clean charcoal.
Do you reckon that?
Dovetailing on that a little bit, what Mike said is, I've been told that sugar maple used to be called scrub maple, alluding to the fact that we had a lot of it and it didn't have a lot of value. I've also been told, and I don't know if this is true or not, that this is from another master distiller in the industry that's from one of our legacy brands, that sugar maple is considered a non-aromatic hardwood. We're not trying to impart flavor to that whiskey. We're trying to remove heavier fusel oils and congeners, which makes it a good medium for doing that.
So then you reckon there's no maple flavor that's been imparted from the charcoal maple into the final distillate, eh?
No, yeah.
It's just the same thing as charring a barrel. It's just a cleaning process.
It kind of kickstarts the aging process a little bit, maybe.
A little bit of color.
Interesting.
Tinge of smokiness, maybe, but I'm going back to the history a little bit. I was in Glengoyne, Scotland, or at the Glengoyne Distillery in Scotland, and they talked about back in the old days, they used to use charcoal and river balls to filter their whiskey prior to barreling. And it's always fun to put a ribbon on a box that's considered history, but it's almost more ethereal than that. People, like we said, been filtering liquids through charcoal since time immemorial. And if you go back and look at some of the Victorian ads for whiskey in the state of Tennessee, like the Nashville Union and things like that, you would see ads for Lincoln whiskey and Robertson whiskey. And to where, that charcoal mellowing process was very much ingrained in those two communities in the way that they made whiskey. If you looked at the rest of the state, and Carlo, you know this, and the guys do too. 1896, our industrial census showed we had 322 distilleries
Absolutely
registered in the state. And all of those people weren't making what we would consider Tennessee whiskey today. A lot of those guys were making what would essentially be bourbon. But really, Robertson County and Lincoln County became known for that as a hotbed. And so the history is a little cloudier than what we want it to be.
Yeah.
But for some reasons, those two areas really became known for that.
Yeah, that is in the book. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Mike.
I've seen an ad for a distillery that was in Lee's home county in Williamson County. I used to represent in the legislature, the White Maple Distillery. And although it was in Williamson County, they advertised making Lincoln County whiskey.
It was a big thing.
And those two guys came from Lincoln County, Mike. Don and Ty Womack, yeah.
So I visited at least 35 to 40 distilleries in Tennessee in my multiple travels down there. And it was amazing to me how it differed from distillery to distillery, how much charcoal they used or how much charcoal it went through, which I found fascinating. And it was really a distiller's choice. How about you, Mike? Do you use a lot, a little, medium? Your thoughts?
We do custom distillation and contract distilling. Therefore, we do whatever our customer wants to do, what it takes to get the flavor profile that they want, that their brand needs. But our vats right now have probably 8 feet of charcoal in them. We have two different bleaching vats, and they're both about 8 feet.
So just for the sake of the interested consumer out there, by law, is there any law that requires anything from a whiskey if it's called Tennessee whiskey? So what are the check boxes that need to be ticked if people are calling their whiskey a Tennessee whiskey?
First, it's got to be made in Tennessee. And there is a state law. I forget the public chapter number now. It was passed about 2012, maybe. We tried to pass it in 2011, and we got some objection from some of the incumbent distilleries. The next year, those came back and wanted to pass it. But you basically have to meet all the requirements for bourbon whiskey, and then also be made in Tennessee, and also be sugar maple charcoal mellowed before going in the barrel.
Anything else except they got those 3 basic points, I think it was? Anything else missing there? Or that?
Mike, this is a question for you guys. I'm not sure. It's not allowed to leave cross state lines either, is it? The barrel? So the barrel...
Yeah, Matt's right about that.
So it has to be bottled in Tennessee as well as fermented, distilled, blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
And the barrel can't cross the state line at any point in its aging process.
That's important. Got it.
Got to be aged.
Fascinating.
So it can't go on a round the world voyage and come on back. Yeah, I get it. Okay.
Nobody's going to
I think in Kentucky, Kentucky bourbon, it has to spend 3 years in Kentucky, and then it can leave the state and still be called Kentucky bourbon, but not so in Tennessee.
I think it's a year and a day in Kentucky.
Oh, a year and a day. Yeah.
Okay. But that doesn't apply to Tennessee. It's got to be all Tennessee. And is there a minimum aging period for Tennessee whiskey?
No.
If it's younger than 4, you have to have an age statement on it, which is the same requirement for bourbon or any other kind of rye whiskey. Or
if it's younger than 2, you can't call it straight.
Got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Do you want to start? Want to try a dram?
Unless there's anything else our guest would like to start in.
Is there anything I missed? Yeah. How have you found getting this? The interesting part about Tennessee whiskey was that you got a lot of small craft distillers bubbling up, first among which was Nelson Greenbrier, and they started to get bigger and bigger, and places like Matt's, etc. Originally, you didn't have enough to just fill local demand, let alone crossing state lines. How have you found getting out of Tennessee and getting into larger accounts across, or getting out into the rest of the country?
Somebody else can speak to that. That's not me. We're still only within the state of Tennessee, and that's been very intentional on our part, but one of the other guys can probably speak to.
Let's ask the Nelson Greenbrier guys, because I know you guys are everywhere.
Yep, we are a coast to coast. I don't think we're quite in 50 states, but we're in a good chunk of them. Tennessee whiskey, it's got a really cool heritage about it and a super sweet history. And I think once you start getting out and about in the world and you start talking to these bartenders and bar owners that really know their stuff and are interested in good quality products, I have found there is always a space on the back bar for a good bottle of Tennessee whiskey. It makes that cocktail, the old-fashioned, taste just a little bit different. It's a different story between you and the customer. And really, that's not 50, maybe 60 to 75% of the business is getting a good story across the bar. And Tennessee's got one from start to finish. You've got some cool heroes in its history, Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett. It's a sweet distilling history that was just now really starting to get told, thanks to people like you, sir. But it's been a lot of fun to get out and represent it.
I have to say that Nelson Greenbrier is one of those surprises that you come across when you're reading about Tennessee whiskey and Tennessee history, because Nelson Greenbrier, before Prohibition, was one of the largest distillers in the country. And it was only, and it went defunct when Tennessee went into its own prohibition long before national prohibition, and didn't get picked up or didn't get revived until after the craft distilling legislation had been approved. And it's been a remarkable comeback.
Just now celebrating our 10th year. We've got one of the most fantastic American whiskey stories I have ever been told. Their heritage and history, again, is absolutely fantastic. And really, they kind of laid some of the groundwork for just modern whiskey and American whiskey in general. Yeah. Not just Tennessee, but just whiskey.
And the fun part is that the label that you see on the store shelves today is very close to the original label that you would have seen in the late 1890s or turn of the century.
Yeah, we tried to stick as close to our predecessors and our history as much as possible. And it shows the moment you look at the bottle and when you walk in the front door of the distillery. It's a pretty cool spot to be a part of.
Bear is asking, and it'd be unreasonable not to bring this up here, the 800 pound black label gorilla in the room. How is it y'all making your whiskeys and marketing them outside of the state? I wouldn't see that the folks in Tennessee care about the big name so much. But in terms of that, the idea of Tennessee whiskey has been carried internationally by other people. So how is it that those of you who are selling outside the state see the marketing of what you're doing on the back or adjacent to that big brand that's so well known internationally?
I can see that a little bit. We tell people, and like Brandon said, we have a rich distilling heritage in Tennessee that Mike touched on, and we talked about some of the early history. Up until the last 25 years, when you thought about whiskey, you thought about Scotland, Ireland, Kentucky, and Tennessee, even though we kind of lost a little bit of our heritage. But I think it gives us a little bit of a benefit of the doubt in the marketplace, being a Tennessee distiller, being in those four main regions. We do sell, and obviously Jack Daniels and George Dickel carried the standard for a long time and really kept the identity of Tennessee distilling alive. And so we sell whiskey in the UK market. We actually do really well over there. And interestingly, like Matt does, we're a bottle and bond distillery. So we make bourbon for half the year and then Tennessee whiskey for half the year. And then we sprinkle in a little bit of rye whiskey as well. But we see ourselves maybe 65-35 bourbon to Tennessee whiskey, even in the state of Tennessee, closer to 55 to 45 out of our own tasting room. But in the UK, those numbers are closer to 50-50. And we've asked, it seems like we're selling more whiskey in the UK market as far as ratio goes. And we've asked the question to our rep, who's Paul Roger over there, why they think that's the case. And the feedback they're getting from the consumer in the UK is that Tennessee whiskey is almost easier for them to understand than bourbon. They feel like bourbon is a little bit more enigmatic in the fact that you can make it in all 50 states. And because Tennessee whiskey is tied to a sense of place, they understand that from their single malt Scotch frame of mind when it comes to an Isla malt or a Speyside malt or lowland malts or a Highland malt. Interestingly, we sell just as much Tennessee whiskey, but normally we see our bourbon sales higher. And a lot of that's probably misconceptions on the part of the consumer domestically, because the Tennessee whiskey category has been forever shaped by the big boys.
Sure, certainly. For what it's worth, rye has not caught on in the UK as a category like it has over here for varying reasons. Anybody else see you exporting to the UK? I got reason to ask.
Yeah, so we are in Italy, France, and Australia.
As well as the UK, or no?
Yes, as well as the UK.
I figured as much, given your ownership there and your company. Anybody else amongst the four? I know first Mr. Cunningham's not there. And you, Mr.
We have various brands all over the world.
Okay.
I drank some of my whiskey in a bar in Singapore last year.
That had to be really satisfying. Knowing what I know about how hard it was for you guys to get that done, that had to be a very satisfying moment.
And Mike actually had the first Tennessee whiskey brand to hit the market since 1937, Mike, with Collier and McKill.
Yeah.
So yeah, he had a hand in revitalizing it for sure.
Yeah.
It was pretty fun.
That's very cool.
It's good to know. No, I sometimes write for British trade publications, and I'm pitching them right now in some spirit articles. I want to get that. It could be useful. Thank you for that. And we'll be getting to tasting shortly. And Carlo, why don't you crack the first one here?
Why don't we do Lee's right off the bat?
Okay. And while Carlo's doing that, and we get talking shortly about the flavor characteristics, aroma characteristics, palate characteristics of your products here, I'm curious, to what extent, and this would go to you, I think a lot, Mr. Williams, since you were progenitor of the laws and all that, to what extent has the growth of Tennessee craft distilling, whiskeys in particular, gone to helping to kick up tourism in your state, in as much as adult beverage tourism is blown up in the past 15 years, not only for spirits, but for other beverages too? I can't imagine it's had some positive effect for your economy.
It has, although our facility doesn't do tours because we're pretty much a manufacturing location, and that's not our business. But there are thousands and thousands of tourists that come through these other distilleries every year. There's one distillery in East Tennessee that is really the most visited distillery in the country, and I guess in the world.
Sure.
350,000 visitors a year. It's helped a lot. For some reason, people like to look at stills, and they like to look at barrels in warehouses, and I know I do.
Well, the smell can't be beat. It smells very alluring no matter what distillery you're in anywhere in the world. The smell of those grains going through those processes, grains and fruits going through those processes, it can be very enticing. Anybody else there got any comments about tourism, perhaps your individual operations?
Yeah, I can chime in a little bit. For us, we're not located necessarily in a tourist town. We're 45 minutes outside of Nashville, but we've created a really strong home place here that is a great stop in between Nashville and people traveling in Kentucky who are doing Kentucky's Bourbon Trail, traveling through to hop on Tennessee's Whiskey Trail right across the state line on the Kentucky-Tennessee border. And we feel like we've done a great job for the community of Clarksville here. And without question, it's an important part of our business model is our local visitors here to the site. So it's been important.
Yeah, I would agree with what Matt said. We see close to 30,000 paid tours per year at Leaper Sport. And we actually, we're family owned, which is a blessing and a curse, as you can imagine. But when we were building, yeah, absolutely. Matt understands. And when we were building our financial model for the distillery, we wanted to be in the whiskey business like Mike. We wanted to we built the business on the traditional distribution model. Didn't factor really any kind of revenue from on-site tours and bottle sales and cocktails and all the rest of it. We quickly learned that there was a hell of a draw for it, and it actually helped us get into black a lot sooner than we ever anticipated. And there's a genuine interest in how spirits are produced and Tennessee whiskey and all the rest of it, which we've been able to capitalize on. And obviously local governments love it because it's bringing in cash flow to these individual counties and municipalities, but you're not having to educate their kids and handle most of their day-to-day waste and things like that. So I think it's good for everybody concerned, and it helps spread educationally. It's just teaching people about what we're doing and the passion behind it and all the rest of it.
Sure. People got to eat, and after they're eating and drinking, they got to sleep somewhere. So that's good for all.
And Brandon being in downtown Nashville, man, they're perfectly suited for that.
Yeah, tours are a huge part of us. We also have a restaurant up front there, open 7 days a week. We do a lot of private clubs as well. It's a gorgeous distillery, especially for being in an urban situation. So yeah, we try to promote as many heads in the door as possible.
That's a former Packard plant or something like that. There was an automotive plant.
Yeah, yep. And then we've got Marathon Music Works right as our neighbor down there. It's a cool little spot right outside of the interstate.
Fantastic spot.
Lots of visit.
Lee, we're tasting your bottled in bonds here. It is the mash bill, 70% corn, 15 rye, 15 barley malt. It is New American Oak, char number 4, I believe that number 4 refers to. And it's a 4-year-old limited release. And it's in a 700 milliliter bottle. You sent us a bottle that's going off to Europe. No, this is a U.S. bottle. Okay, never mind.
We made the decision once we started selling. Actually, the UK was our second market outside of Tennessee, which is wild. We ended up by there on accident, to be honest with you. And you can't take a 750 into the UK, as y'all will know. So we did everything to 700. We hadn't seen any backlash on it yet, so we'll see what happens. But, we went to that custom bottle last year.
I know it was intended for U.S. sale because they got the U.S. government warning on the back label. So that's why I did a double take there. Yeah, but I lived a long time in the UK, hence my noticing these little differences in being in our business for so long. In terms of the smell, taste, and all that, I'll leave it to you and Carlo. I like it. I'll leave it at that.
I think this is a beautiful whiskey, Lee. I'm just curious. This has a 15% malted barley, which is a pretty high for most American whiskeys. Why did you choose that? Because I think it imparts a tremendous flavor to the whiskey, but I'd like to ask why you did that as a distiller.
I love the history of malt. Any kind of fermentation outside of fruit starts with, you have to have malt to be able to accomplish that. For one, I just love the history behind malt. And so we actually treat our malt as a flavoring grain versus just a straight enzyme grain. We actually use a toasted barley malt, and we get that out of Riverbend Malt House out of Asheville, North Carolina. And so we pay a little bit more, but we treat that malt as a flavoring grain. We feel like it adds a dimension. It's really in the realm. It's actually a 6-row brewer's malt, which is interesting. But it has some caramelized sugars. They toast that malt after the 2-step drying process, which it's almost in the realm of a Vienna style malt. There was a little bit of leap of faith.
I was just going to say that sounds like a Vienna malt. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a Vienna style malt. So we use 15% in everything that we do. That's just one of our differentiation points. The other thing is we use a sweet mash process versus a sour mash process.
Why don't you explain that for the people out there who don't know? I think that's a good, just for 2 seconds. Yeah, please.
Yeah, the backstory on that, Mike probably is going to cringe when I talk about this. I dabbled with some home distilling back in the day, but I don't talk about it much anymore. But anyways, I was using a sour mash process. And as we got into getting our distillery up and running, and I spent a lot of time at Wilderness Trail Distillery up in Danville, Kentucky with Pat Heist and Shane Baker, their friends and obviously mentors. And so they were using the sweet mash process. So I learned more about it, and boil it down simply is we're not taking any spent stillage or backset and adding that to our mash water, which in effect gives us a higher starting pH, which sometimes cannot be optimal for fermentation. You usually want to set your fermentations up on a 5.2 pH. And so we end up with a higher starting pH, but that higher pH, it translates all the way through the process through distillation into maturation. So that's the main reason we do it. It puts a little more emphasis on us to maintain cleanliness during fermentation. It's a gentler cooking process. We're only taking our mash water to 200 degrees Fahrenheit before we start introducing our corn, and all the heat goes off. So it's a little bit of a gentler cooking process, but it can also lend itself to more bacterial contamination if you don't really have a clean environment that you're working under. So a sweet mash process is very different for us. I think there's only a handful of distilleries right now. I'm not sure if Brandon or Matt are using it or not, but you are? I didn't know that, Matt. That's good.
Matt, you're using it?
Yes, we are too. We don't do anything much here.
I've noticed throughout Kentucky and Tennessee that there has been a small movement of people going to the sweet mash.
Yeah, it's just a differentiation point. And other than that, I would say we're all pot stills. We use a Scottish swan neck pot still and barrel entry proof at 110 proof on everything for various reasons. But yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's an incredibly flavorful whiskey. You've got all that caramel and vanilla. You've got a big shock of pepper in there. But there's that sweetness that's brought in through the barley that really just makes it very special, I think. Sure.
And we're non-chill filtered as well. And we tend to produce a robust whiskey. It has a kind of a velvety mouthfeel. It may not be an entry kind of level whiskey. It is robust. Like I said, we get a lot of dried fruit notes on that whiskey, oatmeal raisin cookie and things like that. But
fabulous whiskey. All right, we're going to a bit of a rush here because we got to keep moving. Sorry about that. We're going to go on to the Nelson Greenbrier, and we're going to do their standard bottling first. So that,
And then after that, the bottle and bond.
and after that, the bottle.
We're
of
sent
bond.
both. So we'll run that by us, Mr. O'Daniel.
All right, so the first one is our Tennessee whiskey. This is a sour mash whiskey coming in at 91 proof. It is a blend of mostly 5 and 6-year-old. It's following all the rules of a good Tennessee whiskey. Delicious flavoring on the front, a little bit softer on the palate. Again, you get those dried cherry notes, a little bit of apricot. I get just a pinch of honeysuckle on there, and then just a little bit of that tobacco box humidor, one of the old ones that your grandfather had. Finishes nice and clean, got a really nice aftertaste. The breath out I find really approachable. And then this mash bill is the original. We tried to replicate what Charles was doing from the very get-go, and I feel like we hopefully did a pretty good job at representing the history aspect of Nelson's Greenbrier. A super fun whiskey, very approachable, easy drinker. It tends to get me in trouble when I find it sitting on the front.
I have to say, I have a friend of mine who goes with me on many of my tasting trips. His name is Rich Sarsich, and we put down a bottle of this, and we both tasted it, and he goes, "Oh no, this is dangerous." It's a very easy sipping whiskey, and it's very flavorful. It's got a great nose to it up front. And again, really super smooth at the back. It really is just a very easy drinking whiskey. And I mean that as a compliment, not as anything else. But I really love this whiskey. And I fell in love with this whiskey when I was tasting it off the still when I first went in their first year. So I was really thrilled to see what's going on now.
Yeah, the new make on this one is really good, which is nice. I find that a new make whiskey can be an acquired taste, and it just depends on several factors. But this one kind of hit the sweet spot for me right off the pot, and it has not disappointed all throughout its life.
That's a very nice, easy drinking whiskey. So tell us a little about the bottle and bond.
All right, so bottled in bond. So this is following the Bottled in Bond Act of 1897, coming in at 100 proof, distilled, manufactured, all the good things there at Nelson's Greenbrier in one season. And it is actually the exact same mash bill and technically, I guess, the same whiskey as the one we just tried. So this one is a straight 6-year-old, 100 proof. So you're getting a little bit more of those oak tones. I've got a little bit more caramel flavoring to it. I still get that red cherry note and the apricot as well. A little bit heavier on the tobacco notes, a little more like that barn floor aspect in the cigar box, but a really nice chew on this one. This one's got a little bit more like sit back and hang out for a little bit. I really like to let this one breathe just a little bit on the counter before I get into it. And like the breath out on it is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, it's got that like peppery note to it too. It's got a little of that to it. And it's got just a much bigger, richer nose to it. It really does.
A little more on this one compared to the first one we just tried. It's just got that chew to it that just really lets it sit and explore a little bit easier than the first one.
Yeah, the chew, as you say. Now, I have to say, this is one of those moments as a whiskey drinker where you have some angst because you say, I love drinking this on its own, but in a cocktail, this is going to stand out as well.
Oh, man, this ain't in an old fashioned. We had one last night. First third was just as good as the bottom third.
Oh, yeah.
That is my telltale sign of a good whiskey is how well it sits in a cocktail. This one rides all the way through. The 100 proof really kind of lets this one shine. Yeah, we're really proud of this, really.
Yeah, that's a beautiful whiskey. That really is something special. Hats off to you guys. Really great stuff.
We're having fun. That's all that matters. We're hanging out every day, making whiskey. And what else can you ask for out of life?
Very good. Is that mine?
This is yours.
Aha.
Yes.
I thought he was stealing my whiskey. You can see I get very personal about that.
I was just pouring the next one. Next one up here is the aforementioned Old Glory, also a bottled in bond.
I'm especially excited to see this for you, Matt. This is so cool, the bottled in bond.
Thanks. Yeah, this is what we set out to do. When we first started, we decided that if it was going to have our name on it, we were going to make it from scratch. And that's what we've done with everything, all of our whiskeys in the Old Glory name. And so to hit that bottled in bond mark was really what we set out to do. What you're drinking is a blend of 5-year-old barrels. They're all 5 years old, obviously meeting the same requirements of that Bottled in Bond Act that Brandon just talked about. Mash bill on it, 73% corn, 19% wheat, and 8% malted barley. That 19% wheat in this Bottled in Bond stands out, but not in the traditional sense that the way wheat stands out. It really interacts with this. We use a number 3 char barrel from Kelvin for all of our Tennessee whiskey. And this has a lot of really really good spices in it. Wheat's typically, at least in my opinion, a lot more mellow, but this drinks in a similar fashion to a whiskey with some rye in it. A lot of that, we think that wheat really shines over 100 proof. And a lot of wheated whiskeys that are in the 80s or 90s, we feel like do a disservice to wheat. And that's not saying, like, we have a small batch that's 90 proof as well, but this bottled in bond, we really feel like that wheat really shines.
Are you the only Tennessee distiller that uses wheat? Is there anybody else who's using wheat?
Brandon, I think, is. Yeah.
So ours is 16% wheat.
16% wheat. Okay.
We use 15% wheat in our bourbon, but the rye for the Tennessee whiskey.
Got it.
And then I'm going to at the higher proof on the wheated bourbons and whiskeys makes a huge difference. It brings out that spice, really kind of replicates that rye, but in a little more rounded fashion, which is I find a little more approachable, especially for those that are just now getting into that rye spice in general.
So this, again, Matt, this is a really lovely whiskey. Again, very smooth. It's got a little bit of bite to it at the end, but there's a lot of those dried fruits up front, and then some caramel and vanilla that really come through very lovely. And it's a little chewy too, which is really, I think, a great characteristic.
Thanks. Something we're really proud of.
That's a really lovely whiskey, I have to say. Really thrilled with that.
And wrapping it up will be the Borchetta brand.
Yeah. So this is
bourbon.
from the 10 South folks. Mark at the last minute couldn't make it, but they had set their bottle. So I think it's only
Taste it, and
Taste
any of you gents who've had the chance to do the same can also weigh in your comments if you care to. This is here what it looks like.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, it's labeled small batch, and unlike all of those that y'all sent that are in general terms referred to as overproof, this one is 40% alcohol.
And does it say Tennessee whiskey, or does it just say bourbon?
It says bourbon made by Big Machine Distillery.
Yes, that's the end of it.
Oh, that's very different. That's very different than anything else we've had so far.
Yeah. Is there a mash bill in this at all?
Very different. Boy, stylistically, I would
Smoky.
I would say it's not at all like any of you gents' samples that you sent in here. I'm not saying it's better, worse, or I'm indifferent to it. It's just very different. Stylistically.
Different.
Boy, I would say this could be made from a different country, let alone a
Very
different
smoky.
state. Wow. Yeah, very smoky. Yeah. Okay.
But interesting. Very interesting.
Have any of you tried this one? You know of? Borchetta? Okay.
I have not.
All right.
I was familiar with the Clayton.
That being said, going from bottled in bond down to 80, that's a hard
big-
chase.
It's
I
agree.
That's a fair trade-off.
Fair enough. I think that might have.
All right. Well, that little bit will be edited.
I got to say, gentlemen,
in a fine
thank
way.
you so much, because
Yeah.
all these whiskeys were really just
Yeah.
tremendous. And so completely different. And I think, again, without trying to slight anybody, I think one of the things that intrigued me most about Tennessee whiskey was that certainly the two legacy brands have been putting out a similar style whiskey for, 100 years. But the new Tennessee whiskeys are these incredible, complex craft whiskeys that are just, they're at a whole nother plane, what you guys are doing. It's just really incredible. This is great whiskey, is really what it is. And I really wanted to make sure I said that.
Oh yeah, I got to quickly chime in. All four samples we had of yours were very delicious and grabbed my attention. I really enjoyed those, and thank you all for sending us full bottles, because these will be enjoyed for some time to come. I do appreciate that. And lastly, for the general consumer who might be making their way to Tennessee in 2025, is there a statewide festival, or maybe a couple of them you can refer people to?
They should go to the Tennessee Whiskey Trail website, get on the Whiskey Trail, and go visit all the distilleries that are on the trail. And there's some that aren't. They should maybe look for those as well. But the Whiskey Trail is the way that these guys market themselves. And you can, I think you can get a check on your passport or something. And they still do that and try to visit them all.
Do you folks still do the grits and grains?
Yep. Such a fun festival. We had so much fun. Last year was my first time. We probably had too much fun. But yeah, it was a really good time. I think there's a festival April 5th at Andrew Jackson's estate, which we're going to be there. Really going to be a good time as well. And then you got National Tennessee Whiskey Day. Gentlemen, May 21st, I believe is the date on that. So I'm sure there'll be several parties for that one as well.
Hopefully this episode will get posted by the May 21st Tennessee Whiskey Day. Help you to get it out there in social media in the usual ways. Gents, thank you for joining this episode of Drinking on the Edge with my friend Carlo DeVito, talking about Tennessee whiskey.
Guys, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you
Thanks,
very
guys.
much for having us.
Good to see you. Good to see y'all.
Bye.
Whew.